May the 20th. And you said that we have a quorum. Were the press notified?
Yes, the press have been notified.
Okay. The first matter on our agenda for today is reviewing and approving the meetings from our last meeting, which was in February. Has everyone had a chance to look at those meeting minutes? If there are, I guess, no discussion beforehand, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes from February 18th.
I moved. Approve.
Second, Matt Sawyers.
Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Anyone opposed? The minutes are approved. So you all may recall last year, our committee is the composition of two committees that previously existed, and they used to meet together. And last year, the staff at KHC combined them into one committee, the Planning and Communications and Programs and Policy Committee. So now we meet together, and just like last year, our main focus are two annual planning documents that the corporation puts together. The first will be for the fiscal year 27 corporate strategies, and the second is the fiscal year 27 allocation plan. And so after we receive these matters, we will have to make a recommendation to the big board next week when we meet as to the allocation plan. The corporate strategies, there's no motion, it's just informational, but I would like to go ahead and turn it over to John to present the corporate strategies.
Thank you, Heather. Good to be with everyone. Good afternoon. John Davidson, and Deputy Executive Director of Business Services. If you'll scroll down just a little bit, Sam. As Ms. Becker indicated, there are two things we will be discussing today. One requires a motion and action. The other does not. The overarching strategies I will be presenting for fiscal 27. The allocation plan will then follow that. And then I added here next week, Tracy Thurston, our CFO, will be presenting to the Finance Committee for action and recommendation to the full board our budget in the Finance Committee. So if you'll scroll down, Sam. Every year, this is an overview of sort of our planning process. I won't spend too much time on it, but I do want everybody to sort of see the intentionality and thought behind where we are. January and there's a cost revenue analysis done in January where we analyze the annual operations, overhead, revenue generation. Tracy Thurston provides us with profit loss statements on a quarterly basis, and we look at sort of all of our activities. Then that informs our strategy and business planning, which our strategies will look at. I'll talk a little bit about our current fiscal year strategies for 26 and then our new ones for 27, and specifically some minor changes and differences between those. But once those are established, every department at the corporation has what is called a scorecard where they are tracking goals, metrics, and information in accordance with those strategies. Then next, that comes the allocation plan, and it determines how the financial resources will be invested across all of our programs. Wendy Smith will be presenting that for approval and recommendation to the full board. You will see how extensive this document is, and roughly accounts for about $1.3 billion of financial resources. As I mentioned earlier, the next item is the operating budget. We always take a balanced budget to the board, and across the multiple programs we operate, some very akin to financial banking, some are more missional. All that goes together in one comprehensive budget that will be reviewed next week by the Finance Committee and by the full board at the end of this month. And then throughout the year, on a quarterly basis internally, we do tracking and reporting against all of these items. And then in February and August, we present to the full board both at mid-year and year-end on how we're doing, both on the allocation plan and on the budget. So I wanted to just share that timeline, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but that sort of lays out sort of what and where and how we do things internally at the corporation. Questions before I go over the last piece of this, which is our fiscal 27 strategies? If not, Sam, will you scroll just a little bit? I shared the timeline a little earlier. This is a reiteration of that. So I want to share a little bit of the fiscal 26 corporate strategies and then the 27 strategies. So big picture, we have 3 corporate strategies this fiscal year in fiscal 26, and then I will go to the next one, fiscal 27. They're very, very similar. We've made some minor changes, but the big picture items are address Kentucky's housing supply gap. If you have been obviously listening for quite a while now, we've been sounding the alarm on that, the supply shortage. I think you will see some items not only in the allocation plan, but also in some of the programmatic items that we're talking about, really trying to increase supply, period, point blank, to provide additional housing opportunities for folks across a lot of different income levels. Secondly, you will see that we're mitigating financial risks and missional risks. So that's in this landscape right now, that's very challenging. We'll talk a little more about what that means. And then last, we don't want to forget about sustaining and advancing our core competencies, making sure we keep the right people here. We hire the right folks, we retain the right folks, we are cultivating future leaders, and we're utilizing some technologies and making informed decisions. So with that, I'm going to focus most of my time on fiscal 27, and I'll point out some of the minor changes. As I said, first and foremost, we're addressing Kentucky's housing supply gap by ensuring the supply gap remains a prominent issue through strategic communication and partnerships. So one of the things that I will say is one of the differences between last year and this year, we took out housing and supply gap there on that first A. So everybody knows what we're talking about. We're the Housing Finance Agency. So, and we also really added an additional through strategic communication efforts and partnerships. You will hear from Heather Haregrove in a little while. She is our housing accelerator. She has gone around the state, crisscrossing the state, looking at partnerships, at making sure we are listening and understanding how and what issues around housing and specifically the supply gap we can help fill, or that other partners might be able to help fill. So it doesn't have to be just us doing that. So you will see that and you'll hear a little more about it. Next, we're highlighting the success stories about the Commonwealth and addressing their gaps. Again, very strategic. You'll understand we have hired Heather to do that, and she's been doing a wonderful job doing that. Last couple of items under strategy 1, continuing to build relationships with non-traditional partners. That's super important and very helpful. Again, sort of the 1A, B, and C are all really, really about getting out, connecting with folks, communicating with folks to address a single issue, which is the housing supply gap. And then what you will see is a new addition from this year to last year is launch new funding and financing to increase supply. I'm very excited about that. And you will see that in the allocation plan, specifically in the way we use some of our housing development dollars and some of the new programs you will hear at the end of this meeting and at the end of the agenda. So I'm very excited about all of those initiatives, and those are part of our corporate strategies, and we're leaning in. Any questions about the first strategy? I'll move to the second if not. Won't be so deliberate about these, but mitigate financial and missional risk. We're going to quickly respond to programs, regulatory and funding shifts while clearly communicating the essential value to KHC's programs, to legislators, stakeholders, and grantors. That's a mouthful, but here's what I will tell you. Winston, Sam, and Wendy went to Washington, D.C. Last month in April, and I think you all got a copy of the LegCon documents, and we're really trying to make a concerted effort to make sure housing's at the forefront for our legislators and our stakeholders, and understanding how important it is, and we're really leaning into that to make sure we're communicating effectively. The second one there, 2B, align, optimize, and leverage financial resources to advance mission outcomes while maintaining long-term financial strength. This corporation was built on long-term financial strength, and it is our duty to continue to make sure that happens and make sure we're leveraging those dollars, optimizing them, and making sure we're putting our money where our mouth is with the dollars that we have responsibility for allocating out for specific housing uses. That does include the administration of programs as well. Last, under 2C, is maintain prudent stewardship of financial resources and effective risk management. Tracy Thurston, our CFO, always on the front of her mind, and certainly we are looking at our enterprise risk management, as well as just making sure we're being a good steward of our financial resources. And you'll hear more about that later in the month at the full board meeting. Last but not least, any questions about item number 2, strategy number 2? Last but not least, sustain and advance core competencies, promote a higher level of employee engagement. That looks different in different areas, whether that's partnering and getting out at Habitat for Humanity events or other building events, success stories, connecting with actual individuals that are recipients of some of our programs, and also just making sure that we are engaging our current employees so that they want to continue to be highly productive, and then we can keep them at KHC as long as possible. 3B is continue succession planning and talent retention. That's pretty self-explanatory. We always want to have a good pipeline of talent and folks that are in the organization and have opportunities to move around. 3C, explore ways to use artificial intelligence to improve customer experience and operational excellence. Prior to this, I was on a call with utilizing Microsoft Copilot, and so we're looking at some technologies. Mary Beth Smith, who's you'll hear from a little later, has leveraged technology greatly, and it has changed her entire workflow and her staffing in the tenant assistance program. So we're really leaning into that. And then last but not least, making informed business decisions via data analytics, right? So making sure we're making decisions in the best interest of the corporation based on data and whatever information is available to make the best decision. With that, I will entertain any questions about any of these strategies, but everything you're going to hear about after this is in alignment with one of these 3 items. I will remind you there's no actionable item. This is informational, but hopefully this frames up sort of all of the other pieces that you will hear in this meeting. And it also frames up the financial implications for the Finance Committee and why we do what we do at Kentucky Housing Corporation.
Does anybody have any questions for John? If nobody has any questions, the next document that we're going to review, Wendy is going to present, and it is the fiscal year 27 allocation plan. And so this is the document that kind of keeps track of all the different funding streams that fund the various KHC programs, and then also tells us the manners in which that KHC will deploy those resources. And so like the operating budget, which this committee doesn't review, speaks to how internal funds will be allocated. This is the document that tells us how KHC expects to achieve its mission in the dollars that it gets. So Wendy, stage is yours.
Thanks so much, Heather. Let me do a vision check for everybody. Is this big enough for folks to see, or do we need to zoom in? You can be honest. Well, I guess Sam's already made that decision for us. We'll zoom in. Thanks, Sam. And if you'll scroll down just a little bit so we can see a little more of there you go. That's great. So thank you so much, Heather. And I just want to recap some of the things Heather said. This is a document that charts the funds that we get or have access to for our programs. And then, so those are our sources. how we use them across our programs, our uses, and then what you all are looking at right now is kind of the roll up, what we call the impact of all of these sources and the uses to which we put them. I want to make it clear that this is always kind of an aspirational document. We are trying to forecast for next fiscal year, right? So beginning July 1, what we think we'll have access to over those 12 months and how we expect to deploy it across Kentucky and across our programs. Some of this is we're hoping that past patterns carry forward, past funding amounts carry forward. Sometimes we know what our funding will be for the next fiscal year. Sometimes we don't. So I want to make it clear that this is only accurate when the fiscal year is over, to be honest with you. And Kendrick has had a practice of in August coming to you all to present kind of the allocation plan actuals. Like, here's what we thought we'd do, here's how it actually turned out. On this sheet that Sam is showing, Sam, if you'll scroll over to the right just for a second, what you all can see is we did actually add the actuals for fiscal year 25. Fiscal year 26 hasn't ended yet, so we can't report those actuals to you all yet. But what we're trying to say is this is always kind of this long-term process of getting actuals in. We're working in fiscal year 26, and now we are projecting for fiscal year 27, because at next week's board meeting, in addition to the operating budget, we bring this to you all, to the overall board for approval. So it's probably one of the most complex things we bring to you all aside from our operating budget. I just want to acknowledge that. Sam, if you'll scroll back over to the left, that'd be great. I will say that for the board meeting, I don't know if you can see my screen, we're going to have 11 by 17 paper and have this printed on it so everybody can see it, and really be able to dig into it. You all, of course, have the electronic version. The last thing I'll say is that it has been updated slightly, and you will see highlighted in yellow the sections that Kendrick and I updated yesterday. This is the version that will go to the board, but it is slightly different from what was first emailed to you. I just want to acknowledge that. Okay, so let's talk about this first impact page. Really, what this is best at doing is giving you a sense of where the largest amount of funds that KHC administers, where it goes. For a lot of the funds that we use, it has to go to a specific use, or it's limited to a few uses, and it's not negotiable. No matter what direction you all might want to go in or I might want to go in, a lot of our sources have to be used for really specific uses because of HUD or the IRS, wherever they're coming from. This is meant to show you kind of big picture, where are the dollars going that come through Kentucky Housing Corporation? Where do we expect them to go in fiscal year 27? So I won't spend a ton of time on this, but I just want to go through because it does tell you kind of where the big impact is. So if we look at rows A through F under single family programs, this is an area that is housed under Tracy Thurston and led by Jamie Rice, who's actually on this call. And these are the loans that we get out to help folks buy their first home, be able to afford a home, get down payment assistance. And what you can see is that this is where the largest share of the funds that we deploy in Kentucky go. $525 million is our projection for fiscal year 2027. That is largely funded through mortgage revenue bonds and activity in the secondary market, so Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae, where we sell loans to them. What you can see is that we also then are doing down payment assistance, and you can see we assume that most of our borrowers, almost 2,500 out of the 2,600 plus borrowers that we expect are going to use that down payment assistance. It's really essential. You will also see in row E that we now have this shared appreciation mortgage. That is new, and Jamie and Heather Haregrove will be talking about that at the end of the meeting, so stay tuned. You will also see that we invest a little bit of funds in doing some group homeowner counseling to prepare people for homeownership. So as we go down, the next big section is called homeownership production. This is relatively small, but it's important. It's largely funds that we deploy to nonprofits, Habitats for Humanity across the state that do home building or home repair around the state. It's relatively modest, but it is an important part of what we do. Next is multifamily production. This is the second largest area of investment. If you look at that dollar amount, you will see $348 million in multifamily production. I'll talk about that in a little more detail when we get to a future sheet. If someone has a question, please interrupt me because you're not going to throw me off. I've presented this so many times. I can jump right back in if you want to ask anything. Okay, so our next and the third largest area where funds go through KHC is in rental assistance programs. And if you look at row L, what you will see is that we expect to deploy over $212 million in rent assistance that goes to households across the state. This is through both what's called project-based rental assistance, where we are a contract administrator for HUD, and through the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's estimated that we will serve about 26,000 households next year, a little more than that. So that, again, is our third biggest chunk of funding, and that is rent assistance. Unlike mortgage lending or the construction that happens through multifamily programs, this is direct help to help households afford their rent every month. Then as we go down, starting in row O, you see homeless and special needs programs. This is a wide array of programs that typically work through shelter and service providers across the state to help people exit homelessness. We do street outreach. We use a lot of these funds just to pay rent, just to help people get housed, because that's the quickest way to not be homeless, is to get housed, and then to give them services and rent assistance for usually a limited period of time to help them, hopefully get back on their feet. And then that last row, beginning in row R, energy efficiency and weatherization. These are programs we administer through the Department of Energy at the federal level and through the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. There's some LIHEAP funding. We do not do traditional LIHEAP assistance where that is help paying for energy bills. That happens through our community action agencies. We can actually use a portion of LIHEAP to weatherize homes. So funds in this area are helping to weatherize and make energy efficient owner-occupied homes and some multifamily homes. We're beginning to do a little more of that across the state. Now I'm going to pause there because this again is believe it or not, you all, this is the simplest sheet we have in our allocation plan. They all get more gnarly as we go. And I just want to see if anyone wants to ask a question or make a comment before we move to the next sheet. All right, let's go to the sources sheet. I won't spend a ton of time on this because all of this flows into the uses. But what I want to mainly let you all know about this second page is that this charts every single type of funding that comes into Kentucky Housing Corporation and tries to break them into meaningful categories. So we have funds that we oversee. Yeah, if you don't mind scrolling up just a little bit, Sam, I just want to go over the categories. Yeah, we have funding that KHC oversees. We have our Housing Assistance Fund, the State Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we have a Housing Development Fund. And then we have our bonds, private activity bonds. We have tax credits and our single family mortgage activity. So that's all in this second section that's from row E to row K. And then if you'll go down, we have federal allocations and contracts. So these are where we either get, it's called a formula allocation, meaning just because we're Kentucky and we have a certain population, HUD sends us a certain amount of funding, or we have competitively gotten an award from HUD, or we have a contract with HUD to do work for them. So this is a broad range of programs. The next is contracts that we have to do work for the state. So this is our weatherization work, as well as the Rural Housing Trust Fund. And then the last bucket is other, and it's typically one-time funding or funding that is related to a disaster or a crisis like the pandemic. And so much of the funding on here is one-time funding related to the pandemic, or it's just one-time funding that HUD put out, but we do not know if there will ever be another bucket of funds. So we have listed it under here because we don't know if it will be ongoing. So I'm not going to go through all the numeric details because I really want to talk about the uses, which is how all these sources flow into our programs across the corporation. But I do want to leave time for questions because there's a lot on here. All right, scroll on, Sam. Okay, so these are all important. I would say this is the one that we pay the most attention to internally because it charts, again, all of these sources that we looked at, where are they flowing into our programs? Again, many of them can only be used for 1 or 2 programs. It's non-negotiable, but there is some fungibility about what they can be used for. So Sam, can you move the little like navigational thing that's covering? Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. So if we start in row A, again, our single family lending programs, you all will recall we had this rolled up on the impact page, into just a couple numbers. This is just broken out in more detail for you. So in our single family lending, we have our mortgage volume, which we use bonds and secondary markets to fund, and that's $525 million as discussed. We then also do down payment assistance, and we use an internal fund at KHC, the Housing Assistance Fund, which is basically when we make significant profits, we put those back into the HAF. We are a nonprofit quasi-governmental entity, right? Anything we earn goes back into the mission. So the HAF is where we house those dollars. And so we expect to put out $31.2 million toward down payment assistance next fiscal year. That's really essential because it helps our home buyers basically get over the hump of having to save so much as housing prices go up and up and up. Our down payment assistance, I believe, is $12,500, if I remember right. And that's a second kind of loan that is paid back. So it's not a grant, it is repaid. We do have in row D, we are showing that the COVID pandemic homeowner assistance fund, which we call HOAF, which was through Treasury, that is winding down, and we do not expect to deploy any of those funds because the program will sunset. We will have used our funds up, and so that's not going to have activity in 2027. Mortgage, what you will see is that is funded through KHC's Housing Development Fund, which is a pretty restrictive fund. We've had a little over 10 million sitting in there, not sure what to do with it, and have identified this as an option. Again, you're going to hear about that in detail in a little bit. And then we have a little bit going toward our counseling program. So that's our deployment of our sources to the activities in doing our home loans for moderate income and first-time home buyers across the state. It's what we were founded to do in the first place, and it's the one thing that really every housing finance agency across the country does, is single-family lending and usually low-income housing tax credits. We at KHC do just about everything that an HFA might do. So then going down to the next section, which is homeownership production, beginning in row G. Again, this is where we deploy funds to nonprofits across the state, and this is funded through a couple of sources. The HOME program, which is a HUD program, the State Affordable Housing Trust Fund, AHTF, that's in row J. In row K, it's the State Rural Housing Trust Fund. What you will see is no funding in the Rural Housing Trust Fund because it was 2 buckets of one-time money, if that makes sense. And while we are still using those and our partners are still building houses, we have no more of those funds to allocate to partners this current fiscal year or next fiscal year, but we're still doing activity. And then the PRICE program, I will be talking about that later. Honestly, we are just not sure what the numbers are going to be. It's so new and so unlike anything we've done, and I will explain that at the end of our meeting today. And if you'll scroll down a little bit, Sam, to show all of the multifamily. Thank you. So beginning in row M, we have our multifamily production. Multifamily production means building or renovating affordable rental housing around the state. And we use, as you can see, a bunch of sources for this. We use tax-exempt bonds. We use what's called private sector sector equity. So when you use bonds or you use the 9% low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC, that creates private investment in the form of equity that doesn't have to be paid back to help build multifamily properties or to rehab them. It's really, really valuable. And so while these dollars are never held by KHC, we think it's important to chart them because, as you will see, we anticipate that the tax credits deployed in fiscal year 27 will generate over $129 million in private sector equity. So it's really, really valuable, and we want to get it charted on there. I do want to make it clear that is not money that we ever tangibly touch at KHC. We allocate the credits that generates that equity. In row P, you will see we've got $1 million in pre-development loans. This again is funded through our internal HDF and HAF, the Housing Development Fund and the Housing Assistance Fund. We also in row Q have a new effort that we're hoping to roll out this coming fiscal year, which we're calling Capital Placement for Rental Development. We're funding that through the Housing Assistance Fund, which is a KHC fund. That would be placing revolving loan fund dollars with some community development financial institutions, CDFIs, around the state so that they could get more small scale rental housing built via low interest loans. So we're exploring that. We've charted it because we want to be able to do it, but we don't have more details than that because we're still exploring it. I'll be honest with you, we're trying to figure out, in the absence of the legislature taking a whole lot of action around housing supply acceleration, we're trying to figure out what can we do with the funds we have without getting too far extended to get more, housing construction going around the state. In row R, we have the home program, which is dollars that come from HUD. We split this up a couple of ways. This is the first way you're seeing it on this chart. And we are planning to use about $5.6 million in HUD home funds toward multifamily development. We also are planning to put about $3.5 million in State Affordable Housing Trust Fund toward multifamily development. And then National Housing Trust Fund dollars, about $2.8 million, and that represents all of those funds with the exception of some admin. And then we have a little bit of funds that we have committed of our own to try to help public housing authorities pursue what HUD calls restore rebuild. Just $200,000 basically to engage a consultant to help, a technical assistance provider to help public housing authorities map their way through that process. Okay, so that's a lot. That all rolls up into the $348 million that we plan to invest in multifamily development. I will pause there because I just talked a lot. Anyone have questions about multifamily development? The next begins in row W, the rental assistance programs. And I'll be honest, all of this is pretty non-negotiable. This is programs that we get to do very specific types of assistance with. Much of it comes from HUD. So what you'll see is row X is our Section 8 project-based rental assistance, where we're the contract administrator. It's $178 million that will be go through KHC out to privately owned properties around the state to assist with rent. So this is rent assistance that is tied to the property. If the tenant moves, they cannot take it with them. It stays with the unit. Really, really valuable. It's the most affordable housing other than public housing in the state. And then in row Y, we have Section 8 vouchers. This is our housing choice voucher program. And it's the exact opposite. In most cases, when the tenant moves, they can take the voucher with them. They've done their paperwork right, and they can move that voucher to another unit. We're estimating about $31.3 million in rent assistance through that program. We then have in row Z the emergency housing voucher program. This is a pandemic era voucher program that was stood up. It will sunset, but not yet. And so what you'll see is we still do expect to spend $1.3 million in that program. In row AA, we have our second use of HUD home funds. Again, this is a program that allows for several uses, and we do plan to put $2.5 million toward tenant-based rental assistance. The reason this is really valuable is in our homeless programs, the definition of homeless means you have to be on the street. If you are in a hotel motel, you don't count as homeless. If you are couch surfing and living doubled or tripled up, you do not count. But there are many families that become at risk of homelessness in those categories. And so this allows us to serve those households who do not meet the HUD definition for, literal homelessness. And so we have deployed this for rent assistance for those households. In row BB, that's our eviction relief and eviction diversion. That has wound down. Those have sunsetted, so you will see no dollars for this year, where we did have some dollars last year. And then a new category in row CC is HUD 811 tenant rent assistance, and you'll be hearing more about that later. We competed for these funds. We expect to begin deploying them this coming fiscal year. Okay, we're almost there, y'all, I promise. Beginning in row DD, our homeless and special programs. These are primarily an array of HUD programs that have to go to very specific uses for homelessness. These funds almost entirely go to one of the following. First and foremost is rent assistance. Again, as I mentioned, people who are homeless need to exit homelessness, and we try to get them housed as quickly as possible so that their homelessness is brief and ideally non-recurring, and so they can keep their car, keep their job, keep their kids. And so most of this funding does go to rent assistance, meaning to private landlords. Some of it will go to street outreach and other services to keep people housed and to do outreach to people who are experiencing homelessness. So I won't spend a ton of detail. Those dollar amounts are all either based on a HUD formula, or we compete every year for some of the funds. And so it's how well we compete. All in all, it's $13.7 million going toward homelessness. Not nearly enough, I can tell you, because we serve 118 counties with our programs. So everywhere but Louisville and Lexington. We sure could use more in this area. Okay, and then to our last programmatic area on here, energy efficiency and weatherization. And these are funds that come through the U.S. Department of Energy or the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, which is LIHEAP. These are really prescriptive, maybe some of our most difficult to use funds. But we have slated on here $13.8 million in these programs to expend. We have gotten some significant increases in these programs and are really trying to help our community action agencies figure out how to deploy them in greater amounts and faster. And then the other uses are a kind of a potluck. The first is operating support. We use home funds to help a handful of organizations that are certified as community housing development organizations, or CHODOs. That's in row 00. It's a very modest amount, $380,000 in just some general operating support to an array of organizations. We then have in PP a range of loans and grants, $4.5 million. We have a reserve, and you will see this is yellow because it has increased. Basically, we are unsure. There's a lot of uncertainty in our multifamily programs about how much we will be able to deploy in fiscal year 27. So we moved funds after meeting with that department from multifamily development down to the reserve because we are just uncertain if we will use them for our multifamily programs, if we'll roll them to next year, or we'll deploy them through our single family lending. Just to be honest with you, we just have a lot of uncertainty in that area. And then we've got our RR, which is our HAF interim financing for single family activities, which is a really wordy way of saying it's money that we use to kind of warehouse loans when we're moving them in and out of our portfolio. Instead of having to borrow a giant line of credit from a bank, we are able to use our internal funds to do that. And then last is just a reserve of our housing development fund, little over $400,000 that will be left in that even after we do the shared appreciation mortgage program. So all in all, we aim to deploy or hold in reserve almost $1.8 billion across all of these sources into these uses. I know that is so much information, but I'm happy to entertain questions or listen to thoughts or ideas.
Thank you, Wendy. I know that it is a lot of information, but this committee is tasked with making a recommendation to the full board next week. And so we do have an action item that requires a vote And that is, I guess we will discuss whether we want to recommend adoption of this allocation plan to the full board. That would be done through resolution number 26, which is in your meeting packet materials. So I guess first, if anybody has any questions for Wendy or the team, go ahead, and the floor is yours. If not, I guess the motion would be to make a recommendation to the full board to adopt the plan, if anyone wants to make that motion.
Wendy, I just had one question on CC, the 811 funds. What was that for specifically?
Yes. And we'll give you more detail. Mary Beth Smith is here to talk about that. It's actually rent assistance for non-elderly people who have a disability. So it's another form of rent assistance, but for a real specific population.
Perfect. Thank you.
Would anybody like to make a motion to recommend adoption? Or to recommending adoption?
I will make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, is there any discussion?
I have one comment. The resolution number might be different at the full board meeting, but the text of the resolution will be the same.
All right, so we have a motion and we have a second. There being no discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Right, the motion passes and we shall recommend the same. You see on your agenda item that there are 3 new KHC programs. We have some staff who would like to share some informational items about new programs that are underway at KHC. And the first one is Mary Beth Smith, and she's going to talk about HUD 811.
Thanks, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Mary Beth Smith, and I am the Director of KHC's Rental Assistance Programs. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you, those that work with me know I can talk about housing programs all day long, so I'm excited to talk about a new program, which is the HUD Section 811 Project Rental Assistance Program, and it was created for integrated community-based housing for adults with disabilities. So getting into the targeted population, the program will serve adults aged 18 to 61 with a disability, and the household must be at or below 30% of the area median income. And the disabled person must be eligible for community-based long-term services through Medicaid waivers or other state plan services. Moving on to how it works, as Wendy mentioned, KHC received an overall $8 million competitive award from HUD, and this amount covers the first 5 years and then is renewable after that time frame. You're good where you are, Sam. And based on fair market rents and current trends, the funds are projected to house about 150 disabled individuals. And as part of the competitive application, KHC demonstrated a partnership with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, Department of Medicaid Services, and the state's Continuum of Cares, or the COCs. And how properties will receive assistance is KHC will have a rolling application for selected properties, and then we will complete a rental assistance contract with a property that sets the number of assisted 811 units at each property. And then once the units are established, referrals will come through those service partners, Department of Medicaid Services and the COCs, instead of the traditional property waiting list. Sam, you can scroll down, please. So talking about property requirements, eligible properties must be multifamily housing with 5 or more units, and the property must not designate more than 25% of its total units for supportive housing or for residents with disabilities. including any newly added 811 units. And the units must be dispersed throughout the property, not clustered, remembering that the goal for our 811 participants is integration with the community. So just a few notable benefits of the program is that owners can count on reliable subsidies and coordinated referrals to fill any vacant 811 units. And then tenants will be granted affordable housing where they will pay 30% of their income towards their rent. And they'll also gain stability and independence. As far as impact, this is a step in the right direction to strengthen Kentucky's statewide housing stability. So I know that was a very brief, I could talk more about 811, but that's a very brief overview. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I will add that this is kind of a gnarly program. It's pretty tricky. We're mapping out how it's going to work and how we can make it as easy, quote unquote, as we can for everybody involved. But Mary Beth and I have this stance that if we're going to reduce homelessness in Kentucky, we're going to need more supportive housing like this and more rent assistance. And HUD just released a second funding round for this, and we intend to go after that funding, which is good because we have kind of high admin costs relative to the funding right now, and adding more units, we wouldn't have to add any more staff. So we do aim to compete for more.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right, Wendy is going to talk about price.
Believe it or not, Sam, I'm going to ask if you want to zoom out just a little bit so more of the slide can show. So I'm going to share with you all an overview of another new program that we're rolling out. And like 811, we had to competitively apply for this. It's like 811, HUD has begun this practice of doing a lot of kind of one time, or you don't know if it will be more than one time. So it's not steady funding over time. It's like these one-time offerings, which can be great. I will say the concern I have from where I sit is one-time funding expects us to be able to ramp up a lot of capacity to do it. And unless it continues over time or grows, how do we get our partners to be willing to commit to adding staff and adding capacity to work with us on it? But we felt like we couldn't pass this up, even though we've never done anything like this. So I'm just going to call it the price program because it's a really wordy name. It doesn't really tell you a lot. And we'll go down to the next slide to give it more flesh. So the price program, it's a HUD program. And again, it's limited. I believe they have done a pilot round and then this funding round. It is focused on addressing aging manufactured housing across the state and mobile home communities across the state. In December of 2024, KHC, along with the Department for Local Government, DLG, so Matt Sawyer's department, were not Matt Sawyer's, I'm sorry, Kathy Fiegelstallers, were awarded $28 million. Again, it was competitive, and we got the third largest award across the country. We were shocked by that, although Kentucky has a lot of manufactured housing, and so we do have a high need, but we are a little bit like the dog that caught the car. We're like, oh, now we've really got to get going. The funds are going to flow to DLG, but KHC is designing the program and we will administer it for DLG. So we are really acting on DLG's behalf. Next slide. Okay, so there are you can do a range of things with this money. We are focusing on two areas. The first is creating what are called resident-owned cooperatives, or ROCs, which is where you help an existing mobile home, manufactured home community become self-owned and cooperatively owned. That is very complex. We have never done it. we are going to do it, and we put them in our application, this national nonprofit called ROC USA, so Resident Owned Cooperative USA. It's a nonprofit. It's the leader in doing this kind of work. It's also a community development financial institution, CDFI. And so they are going to work with us on identifying communities that kind of meet the right criteria and are interested and have an interested seller to form this legal cooperative and get financing from ROC USA and funding from KHC to offset, the debt on the tenant, on the residents buying their mobile home community. The second area is, and we're breaking the funding basically between these two and then our administrative costs. The second area is what we're calling owner-occupied emergency manufactured housing unit replacement. It's a mouthful. And this is basically a kind of spot. It's not based on mobile home communities. It's going to be individual units around the state where it was a unit that is a pre-1976 manufactured housing unit, which means it does not meet, because it didn't have to meet, what's called HUD code for manufactured housing. It's a really important kind of time demarcation because units before that tend to be wildly energy inefficient and sometimes even dangerous to live in, particularly as they get so much age on them. They're 50 years old now and they didn't have to meet HUD code back then. So they're really often incredibly expensive from a utility standpoint and often not safe. Okay, next slide. So, as I am wont to do, I put a lot more detail in here than maybe we need. But for the ROC program, the Resident Owned Cooperative, again, we're going to put about $12 million into that. And ROC USA will put at least $4 million of their own financing into that. And our aim is to get at least 2 and potentially up to 5 resident-owned communities through this funding. Next slide. And I won't go through all of this, but ROC USA is really going to carry most of the water on this. They are going to be the ones that are doing outreach to tenants, to residents, to owners, to try to figure out who are good prospects. And the ideal prospect really is a local owner who has a good relationship with their residents, and does not want to see it just purchased by like a private equity firm or someone who wants to buy it and kick everybody off, or buy it and raise lot rents so much that folks can no longer afford to keep the unit they own on that lot. Every once in a while, we have one of those happen around here where lot rent is raised so much, folks feel like they've got to move, but they cannot afford to move, their manufactured housing unit. Or they can't find a place to move it to, or the mobile home park is bought and the aim is to clear it and put in like a shopping center or something. And so ROC USA is going to try to identify where the owner, the resident characteristics, and the mobile home park itself kind of meet these ideal or at least acceptable characteristics to move forward toward a resident-owned cooperative. Next slide. Okay, and then when we're talking about the other side, which is replacing one by one these very old non-HUD code manufactured housing units, this is, again, also statewide, just like the ROC program will be. And we are focused on those pre-1976 units where the owner's housing cost burden is over 30% of their income. And that includes their mortgage or a loan payment if they're just making a payment to like a retailer, utility costs, property taxes, insurance, all that stuff. We also are going to focus on folks that earn less than 50% of state median income or county area median income. So low income folks, not the poorest of the poor, but pretty low income folks across the state. Next slide. And we will use the funds to acquire and install new energy efficient manufactured housing that will be basically like for like. So if they had a 1-bedroom mobile home, it will be a 1-bedroom. If they had a 2-bedroom, these will be some of the smallest manufactured housing units, probably because those pre-1976 units are pretty small. We're not trying to, add a bunch of bedrooms or, studies or anything like that. We're trying to just replace like for like and keep it super affordable. We will remove and dispose of that old unit. And if the family cannot stay in the old unit while we replace it, we may pay for some temporary relocation, for folks to stay in a hotel or motel or something like that, Airbnb, whatever, while we replace their home. Also some legal assistance to record it as real property. We would like all of these homes to become real property versus chattel property, which is what mobile homes typically are. And we will pay our nonprofits and other grantees that use these funds what we're calling like a developer production fee, because this is going to be a lot of trouble. We're making that about $20,000 per unit. So basically get it done, do it all compliantly, and then we'll pay you a production fee. Next slide. And again, the eligible users of these funds. So we're going to work through partners around the state. We will allow units of local government and community-based nonprofits who have done some kind of homeowner repair or housing development. If they haven't, they can partner with each other, with an agency that has. We will only do like one funding amount per county. We're not going to fund more than one entity per county. So we really do want to foster those partnerships. Next slide. And these aren't going to be free houses. They are going to be really affordable. And so what we will do is do a 15-year mortgage that is partially or potentially wholly in extreme circumstances forgivable, but there will be a mortgage recorded and we will collect escrows, so taxes and insurance. Because keep in mind, for some folks, they haven't been paying taxes and insurance. And for some households, that might be all they can afford. So we might record a mortgage that just sits there and they have to pay their escrows, their taxes and insurance. And then at the end of 15 years, we will consider forgiveness of some or all of the loan. Our aim is to keep their monthly payment at 30% of their income. That's what we're targeting. Next slide. So we just have a bunch of next steps. We have not launched yet. We are working on a memorandum of agreement with DLG. We are working on a contract with the Rock USA organization. We are about to release what we're calling a request for plans and pricing to modular and manufactured home builders, because we cannot replace these homes with stick-built homes. It has to be either modular or a manufactured unit that replaces them. So what we are asking the builders for is we would like kind of to create a book of plans and pricing for units that can replace these old units, and we know what the pricing is so that all of our nonprofit partners don't have to individually negotiate, and they know we have approved this book of house plans and they know what the pricing is. And so we'll do that. And then we will also finally do a funding application for nonprofits and local governments across the state that want to apply for the funding. So wish us luck. We've never done anything remotely like this before, but it is much needed in Kentucky. And if anybody has questions, I'm all about it. All right, thanks so much, you all.
All right, and our last new program for discussion today is the shared appreciation mortgages. Heather Haregrove and Jamie Rice are going to talk about that.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Rice. I'm Managing Director of Single Family Programs for Kentucky Housing Corporation, and Heather and I will be sharing the shared appreciation mortgage details. This program is something that we are working to develop to address challenges in affordability and housing supply, homeownership supply in particular. We know Kentucky has a housing supply crisis, and we can assign a number to that. From around 2024, it was about 208,000 units, and that is expected or projected to exceed 287,000 units by 2029, pretty evenly split between ownership and rental and pretty evenly distributed amongst the different income bands. So what makes that so difficult is this housing shortage is contributing to the rising cost of housing, which in turn requires larger down payments from first-time home buyers. As a result of that, the average age of the first-time home buyer has reached historic highs for calendar year 25 nationally. That was 40 years of age. And while home prices have continued to rise, the average income of our KHC first-time homebuyers has not increased at the same pace. That gap is creating a real affordability challenge for the households that we serve, and thus the reason for creation of this shared appreciation mortgage program. This slide gives a high-level overview of the proposed SAM program. We're naming it after Sam Thorner in his honor. But no, we name a cat, a dog, and a shared appreciation mortgage is going to be called SAM for short. The program will provide up to 25% of the appraised value or sales price, whichever is less, to cover down payment and closing cost assistance toward newly constructed homes. So that is the key here. We want to deploy this impact capital to directly address supply and affordability for first-time home buyers who are maybe currently stuck between paying market rent and being able to afford home ownership. Next slide, please. This program is for a first-time home buyer, and a very strong component of our program is we are developing a SAM-related homebuyer education course that they must complete prior to applying for the program. It's critical that they understand what this program is and how it works, and it's critical that they do it up front. So we are investing a lot of time in making sure that we get this right. We are also looking to our sister agency, California HFA. They are running a similar program. They have the benefit of a large allocation from their state legislators, but we are looking to them. A lot of the best practices that they've sort of etched out, we're using them for inspiration here. Our program is different because it is tied to newly constructed properties. That includes single-family residence. It can include with an accessory dwelling unit. It can include new construction modular homes. It can include newly constructed or acquired manufactured homes that are on a permanent foundation and converted to real property. And it can include owner-occupied duplexes. The agency defines it. It can even include a home that's complete up to 12 months old but not occupied as well. The repayment of SAM, one of the key features is that there's a 0% interest on this and 0 monthly payments. And by paying down at least 20%, you eliminate the need for private mortgage insurance, which again assists with that affordability for that first-time home buyer. So this assistance is deferred. And the borrower, so it helps the borrower because they won't have that additional monthly payment on top of their first mortgage. But the repayment will be triggered at the time that the home is sold, that 30-year mortgage is paid off, there's a cash out refinance, transfer of title, or default in foreclosure. And at the time of repayment, the borrower will repay the original principal balance that they borrowed at the time that they purchased their home. And then whatever percentage of that original purchase transaction that they obtained in the SAM, up to 25%, is the same percentage of the future appreciation of that home that they would repay. So in simple terms, KHC will help the borrower get into the home with no money out of pocket, but later, if the property increases in value, we will share in a proportional part of that appreciation. If the property does not appreciate in value, the borrower would still repay the original principal balance that they borrowed. And then the principal repayment and the appreciation that is repaid will be recycled and pushed out to the next home buyer to keep this program moving forward. Next slide, Sam. So for a repayment example with numbers, let's say the original purchase price of that property was $200,000, which unfortunately that's where our first-time home buyers are exceeding $200,000 on average for purchase price. So they purchase a home for $200,000. They borrow of that $50,000 or 25% toward that shared appreciation mortgage, which means they're financing $150,000. And then at the time of repayment, let's say that home is valued at $250,000. So then the appreciation is calculated by taking that current market value, subtracting the original sales price. So in this example, the home has appreciated by $50,000. So of that appreciation amount, they would repay 25% of that, or $12,500. They are retaining the $38,500, or 75% of the appreciation, but they would repay 25% of that plus their original principal balance of $50,000 for a total repaid of $62,500, which would then go back into the fund to help the next home buyer. Next slide, please. So we see this, our target date is to roll this out in July, and we're currently shopping it or having lenders break it apart. We haven't originated loans on the outside in over 20 years, so we're using lenders, real estate agents. We've had the Home Builders Association look at this. We've had Kentucky Manufactured Housing Institute look at this, and we're trying to make sure that we're covering all the bases. What have we thought about? What have we not thought about? And overall, the feedback is very positive. But for phase one, KHC is making an initial investment of $10 million from the Housing Development Fund. And then based on assumptions, we feel like this may go more for manufactured homes, at least initially. But based on some assumptions for acquisition costs, we estimate we should be able to serve approximately 160 households from this. But it's all exciting. It's thinking outside the box. We've never done this before. But Heather will go into some of the phase two potential for this program.
Thanks, Jamie. So I'm Heather Haregrove. I'm KHC's Housing Supply Accelerator. And looking ahead at phase two, we're looking into opportunities to expand the program through additional funding sources. Specifically, we're going to reach out to employees and pitch the idea of creating an employer-assisted housing program that they could use to help attract and retain employees. Additionally, there are very few local municipalities that are currently offering down payment assistance. So we're going to reach out to them and offer to host a down payment assistance program for their residents in return for a contribution to the fund. Banks need CRA credit, so we're exploring ways that they can contribute to the fund to achieve their CRA goals. And last, we think some foundations may have an interest in donating to assist their target populations. We will have the ability for our software to restrict donated funds to specific populations. So we think that this is going to be a really great way to be able to grow the program. Our long-term funding goal is to get the state to appropriate funding for the program. So we plan to collect data that we can share with our legislator to show proof of demand in the hopes that we will eventually get a state appropriation of unrestricted funds that will allow us to help more borrowers that don't have access to assistance through an employer-assisted housing program or local municipal down payment assistance fund. Do y'all have any questions? If not, I'll pass it back to Wendy or Sam or whoever to close us out.
Yeah, that concludes our informational items.
Are there any items from the board or staff that are not on the agenda for today? If not, we are ready to adjourn. Would someone like to make a motion to release us?
I just have one question about the meeting next on the 28th. It is in person, right?
Yes.
Okay. Was you looking for a motion to adjourn?
I sure was.
I can do that, so you can all go home.
All right, somebody want a second? I'll second. All right. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all. Appreciate you.